Welcome to Rise Up Voices from the Frontlines, your window into relationships, identity, safety, emotional awareness, regulation and intelligence, unleashed potential, passion and purpose.
Welcome back to Rise Up Voices from the Frontlines, and this is a Trauma-Informed Leadership Series episode. I'm your host, Krista Fee, and I can't wait to chat with you about breaking the bystander spell, why silence kills, and courage multiplies. Let's talk about the starfish and the spell. There's a story that most of us have heard a million times before. The one about a little girl with ringlet curls and ruffled petticoats walking along the beach, picking up stranded starfish and tossing them back into the ocean one by one. When asked why she bothers, when there are thousands left to save, she replies simply, "It matters to this one." It's a simple story, almost too simple. But hidden inside is a deeper challenge, one that most people miss. Because the truth is that most people walk past the starfish. They notice, maybe they even care, but they keep walking, assuming that someone else will do the work, someone else will take action. That assumption, that paralysis, is what psychologists call the bystander effect. And if the power of one is about the spark that begins change, the bystander effect is the spell that smothers it before it even starts. Today, we're going to talk about how silence kills, why waiting is dangerous, and how one single act of courage has the power to multiply and magnify. So let's begin with the psychology of the bystander effect. Let's start with the science. Back in 1968, psychologists Bibb Lawton and John Darney studied how people respond in emergencies. They found that the more people who are present, the less likely one person is to intervene. It seems super backwards. Shouldn't more people mean more help? But instead, responsibility diffuses. Each person assumes that someone else will take action, and the tragic result is that no one does. This is the bystander effect, and it has been replicated in countless experiments. In one famous study, participants overheard what sounded like someone having a seizure. When alone, most participants rushed to help. But when they thought others were listening too, their response rates plummeted. The same thing happens outside the lab. Think of the stories that make headlines. Assaults on busy streets where dozens of witnesses do nothing. Workplace harassment ignored by entire departments. Humanitarian crisis where nations debate endlessly while atrocities unfold. The silence is not always cruelty. Often it's fear, uncertainty, or that belief that someone else is better equipped. But the result is the same: paralysis. And for the person in crisis, silence is betrayal that not only hurts, it might cost lives. Trauma and the spell of silence. From a trauma-informed lens, the bystander effect has even deeper consequences. For someone who's already experienced abuse, abandonment, or betrayal, silence is never neutral. It's a confirmation of the lie that trauma teaches, that they are invisible, unworthy, disposable. When no one steps in, the wound deepens, not just from the harm itself, but from the absence of rescue. This is why leadership can't afford neutrality. When leaders stay silent, when systems look away, the message is clear: your pain doesn't matter enough. And the nervous system encodes that silence as danger. But on the flip side, when someone breaks that spell, when one person steps forward, the impact is outsized. The nervous system reads the signal: you are not alone. You are worth risking for. And that signal doesn't just help the person in need, it ripples outward, giving other people permission to take action too. Let's talk about some stories of silence, those that have cost lives. Let's go deeper into the real world cost of silence. These are not abstract concepts. History is littered with tragedies, made worse, compounded by hesitation. Rwanda, 1994. The genocide against the Tutsi unfolded in plain sight. Radio broadcasts incited the killings. Bodies filled rivers. International leaders debated terminology. Was it genocide or just acts of genocide? While people were slaughtered, by the time that decisive action came, over 800,000 lives had been lost in a matter of weeks. The bystander spell operated not just at the individual level, but on a global one. Silence was complicity. The Challenger disaster of 1986. NASA engineers knew that the O-rings on the space shuttle had problems in cold weather. Some had already raised alarms, but the warnings got buried under pressure, bureaucracy, and groupthink. On launch day, the O-rings failed. Big surprise. The shuttle broke apart 73 seconds after takeoff, killing all 7 crew members. This was not just a technical failure. It was a failure of courage. People assumed that others would speak louder, but they didn't. And the cost, again, was lives. How many stories have we heard in recent years of entire organizations that knew and said nothing? Victims came forward, but colleagues stayed quiet. Supervisors ignored complaints. HR departments weighed liability instead of integrity. The Me Too movement exposed what happens when silence becomes systemic. Abuse flourishes in the absence of intervention. Let me say that again. Abuse flourishes in the absence of intervention. These stories carry a sobering truth. Waiting is not neutral. It's destructive, and it is often deadly. Stories of courage that broke the spell. The story doesn't end there. Just as silence can multiply harm, courage can multiply healing. Think of the white helmets in Syria. When bombs fell on neighborhoods, most people ran away. But the white helmets, a small group of volunteer rescue workers, ran toward the rubble. They pulled survivors out of collapsing buildings, often at enormous risk to themselves. Their courage broke the bystander spell in a war zone, proving that even in chaos, humanity could still act. And those first voices in the Me Too movement, when Tarana Burke and later women, and slowly but surely men, joined in and said, "Me too," they shattered years of silence. Their stories weren't isolated. They were catalytic. Once one person spoke, others found the courage to follow. What had been hidden in shadows came into light. One voice became thousands, and thousands became millions. And Flight 93, September 11th, 2001. When hijackers took control of the plane, passengers realized they were part of a coordinated attack. They could have waited, frozen in fear, hoping for rescue. Instead, they acted. "Let's roll," one passenger actually said, and they stormed the cockpit. The plane crashed in a Pennsylvania field instead of into the Capitol. Their courage didn't save their own lives, but it saved countless others. These stories show that the power of one doesn't stop at one. One act of courage breaks the spell of silence, making courage contagious. And the trauma-informed cost of silence. Let's pause here a moment and connect this back to trauma. When leaders remain silent in the face of harm, whether in a family, an organization, or a nation, that silence is not just absence, it's reenactment. It mirrors the original wound of abandonment. Think of a child who cries out for help and no one comes. That silence imprints in the nervous system and says, "My voice doesn't matter. I don't matter." And now fast forward to adulthood. When a leader stays quiet in the face of injustice, that old imprint lights up again and that wound reopens. This is why trauma-informed leadership requires presence. Even when the leader doesn't have the perfect words or solutions, sometimes simply saying, "I see this. I won't look away. I will stand with you," is enough to disrupt the cycle. So let's go into breaking the spell in practice. Here's a framework for leaders. How do we do it? How do we break the bystander spell? Here's the framework that you can carry into your leadership, whether you're leading a family, a team, or a movement. First, name the silence. Call out that hesitation. Say, I notice we're all waiting for someone else to speak. Let's not. Naming breaks the diffusion of responsibility and puts the weight back where it belongs, on the present moment. Take the first step. Action lowers the threshold for others. It doesn't have to be dramatic. Raising a question, calling out bias, or offering support to one vulnerable person signals that the spell is broken. Anchor in integrity, not outcomes. The fear of what if it doesn't work paralyzes many leaders. Instead, ask, what is the right action in this moment, regardless of outcome? Courage is measured in integrity, not guarantees. 4, use the witness principle. Remember that others are always watching. When you step forward, you're not just helping in the moment. You're modeling courage for everyone else in the room. Leadership is always public, even when it feels private. 5, build cultures of permission. Create systems where people know that they can speak up without retaliation. Psychological safety, clear reporting channels, and consistent accountability all reduce the bystander effect. When people know that their voice matters, they're more likely to use it. Train for action. In crisis response, we train for scenarios, fire drills, rescue protocols, so that when chaos comes, people don't freeze. Leadership requires the same process. Practice speaking up in small moments, so when the big ones come, the muscle memory is there. Hold accountability. When silence causes harm, leaders must be held responsible, not just for what they intended, but for what happened. Without accountability, silence literally becomes normalized. And with accountability, silence becomes a lesson for growth. So let's shift this from spell to spark. The beach is still covered in starfish. The world is still covered in crisis, and most people are still walking past, waiting, assuming someone else will act. That is the spell of the bystander effect. But leadership breaks spells. It doesn't wait for consensus. It doesn't look around for permission. It steps into the silence and says, I'll go first. When you break the bystander spell, you don't just save one starfish. You light a signal fire. You give others permission to bend down, to pick up, to throw back. You transform silence into movement because courage multiplies. And the power of one is never really about one. It's about the first step, the first voice, the first act that opens the floodgates for many. So the next time you find yourself in a room where everyone is waiting for someone else to speak, to move, to act, remember this: the spell is strong, but it's fragile. All it takes is one. Be that one. And as always, I leave you with this reminder. I may only be able to save one starfish at a time, but together we can save them all. I may be just a single drop in an ocean, but together we become a tidal wave of change. Rise up out of the ashes of your experiences and live and lead your life on fire. Join me in the Rise Up Trauma-Informed Leadership course and community, or bring me to your organization to present a custom keynote or IACET CEU training for your staff. Use the link in the show notes to schedule your complimentary consultation to see how Rise Up can impact your retention, satisfaction, and bottom line.
Become a Rise Up Hero sponsor to provide mental wellness and crisis response resources for those who serve country and community. Join us in the Rise Up movement today.